I stumbled upon it by accident, like most people do when they get caught up in something they're not supposed to know. It wasn't a huge, dramatic moment, no long, drawn-out confrontation or sneakily checking her phone, it was just a random Tuesday evening. I had come home early from work, hoping to surprise her. She had been vague about what she was doing, and for some reason, I had this nagging feeling. When I walked into the living room, I noticed something strange. Her phone was sitting on the coffee table, screen up. Now, I've always been a firm believer in respecting personal boundaries, I never snooped through her stuff. But for some reason, that night, I couldn't help myself. The screen lit up, and there it was, clear as day, a text message from some guy. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe a work colleague or a friend. But as I read through their conversation, my stomach dropped. The texts were flirty, way more than just friendly banter. He was complimenting her looks, sending her heart emojis, and making plans to meet up. I kept scrolling, and my heart sank deeper. The messages didn't just suggest an innocent friendship. They were suggestive, and it became obvious she was seeing someone else. My mind was racing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but how could I not? I tried to tell myself there was some logical explanation, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just some misunderstanding. It was betrayal, plain and simple. I felt numb, like I was watching it all happen to someone else. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process it. So, I put the phone down and walked out, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The house felt colder than usual. I was lost in my own head, wondering how I hadn't seen it coming. The worst part? I had been giving her the benefit of the doubt for so long, letting her excuses slide. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept racing through everything she had said to me over the past few months. The subtle dismissals. The girls' nights that were becoming more frequent. The late nights with no explanations. I was lying to myself, pretending everything was fine when, in reality, the cracks in our relationship had become a chasm. I was done with the waiting. The truth was out there now. The next morning, I didn't even wait for her to get home from work. I wasn't about to let this drag out any longer. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. I don't know what I was expecting, but I sure as hell wasn't expecting the way she reacted when I confronted her. When Sarah walked through the door, I was already sitting at the kitchen table, my arms crossed, staring at her. She froze for a second, her eyes scanning my face like she could tell something was off. I didn't waste any time. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice calm, but there was a coldness underneath it. She blinked a few times, almost like she didn't understand what I meant. "Who?" she asked, faking confusion. But I could see the tiny shift in her expression, the subtle panic that crossed her face. It was enough to make my blood boil. "The guy you've been texting. The one who's been sending you hearts and making plans with you," I said, sliding the phone across the table. I had kept the text messages on the screen. Her eyes flicked down to the phone, and I saw her take a sharp breath. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then she recovered, her usual smugness creeping back. "Are you seriously accusing me of cheating?" she snapped, her voice laced with defensiveness. "You're insane, you know that?" I stared at her, waiting for her to say something that would make sense. But she didn't. Instead, she went on about how I was paranoid and overreacting, that it was just harmless texting. "He's just a friend," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I felt like I was in a bad dream. The lies were so blatant, I could almost hear the rehearsed lines in her voice. She kept up the act, trying to downplay everything, but I wasn't buying it anymore. "Stop lying to me, Sarah," I said, my voice a little sharper now. "I saw the messages. I saw everything. How long has this been going on? And don't give me that just friends crap because I'm not an idiot." Her face twisted in frustration, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the real Sarah, the one who wasn't the picture-perfect wife but someone who would lie and manipulate to get what she wanted. "I'm not cheating on you," she insisted, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You're just being dramatic. It's nothing, okay? Why do you always have to blow everything out of proportion?" The nerve. The way she still tried to play it off as my fault, as if I was the one who was crazy for being hurt by this. I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, shaking with anger, because deep down I knew I wasn't going to get any real answers from her. She'd been lying to me for months. And the worst part? She was still lying, even when I had the proof right in front of her. I couldn't take it anymore. "You're not even sorry, are you?" I asked, my voice quiet now, almost resigned. "You don't regret it. You don't regret any of this." Her face fell for just a second, but she quickly masked it with a glare. "I'm sorry if you're upset, but this is my life, and you don't get to control it. I didn't cheat on you, okay? Just drop it." That was it. I didn't know what else to say. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, was standing there, looking me in the eye and continuing to deny everything. The rest of that night was a blur. I remember sitting on the couch, barely registering the TV blaring in the background, while my mind raced through everything Sarah had just said, or rather, everything she hadn't said. Her lies felt like a slap in the face. The anger I felt at first slowly shifted into something more painful, sadness. I couldn't believe this was happening. I kept asking myself how I didn't see it coming, how I didn't notice sooner. The signs had been there, blaring at me, but I was so wrapped up in the illusion of our perfect life that I refused to see the truth. And then there was the part that hurt the most, the realization that she wasn't even remotely sorry. She had no remorse. In her mind, she was the victim of my paranoia, not the woman who had betrayed me. I don't think I've ever felt more alone in my life than in that moment, sitting there, knowing the woman I had trusted more than anyone else had just pulled the rug out from under me. The next day, I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear her excuses or listen to her try to justify what she had done. But she wouldn't let it go. Sarah came to me, tearfully telling me how I was blowing things out of proportion, that she didn't mean to hurt me, and it was all just a misunderstanding. She begged me to believe her, but I couldn't. The whole time she was talking, I could barely look at her without feeling disgusted. How could she think I was that stupid? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw everything in her face and demand answers. But what would that have done? I had already seen the truth. The facade she had so carefully crafted was crumbling, and I wasn't about to try to pick up the pieces. I wasn't going to beg her to tell me the truth because I already knew it. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the betrayal of trust. It was the fact that the person I had shared my life with, who I had thought understood me better than anyone, was willing to lie so easily, to hide behind excuses and manipulation. I realized that everything she had said, every argument we'd had, every little thing that seemed off in our relationship, had been clouded by her dishonesty. For the first time in our marriage, I started to question everything. All those years I spent thinking she was the one for me, were they a waste? Were we just two people who had convinced ourselves that we were meant to be together because it was easy? And now, here I was, feeling like a fool, knowing that my trust in her was nothing but an illusion. By the time night rolled around, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep living in this lie. But the weight of that decision hung heavy on my chest. I was angry, I was hurt, but more than anything, I felt a sense of grief. Not just for the marriage, but for the person I had become in it, someone who had let things slide for too long, someone who had ignored his gut feeling because he didn't want to face the truth. This wasn't just about Sarah's betrayal. It was about me, about realizing that I had let myself be part of something so toxic for so long. And the hardest part? Knowing that it was going to take time to heal. Time I didn't want to spend in a marriage that was already dead. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever had to endure. Sarah kept trying to act like nothing had happened, like everything was fine, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't look at her without seeing the woman who had lied to my face, who had betrayed me, and I realized I didn't want to be with her anymore. I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. I hadn't slept much since the confrontation, and when I did, my dreams were filled with images of Sarah and the other guy. The thought of her with someone else, touching him, laughing with him, doing the things we used to do made my stomach churn. I was angry, I was hurt, but mostly, I was just done. The turning point came one night, about a week after I found out. We had barely spoken. I had tried to keep things civil, but every time she tried to make small talk or apologize, I just couldn't bring myself to care. I wasn't angry anymore, I was numb. That's when I realized I wasn't just mad at her anymore, I was mad at myself. I was mad for letting things get this far. I was mad for not listening to my gut earlier. And, honestly, I was mad at the fact that I had stayed in a marriage with someone who had never truly respected me. That evening, I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and walked into the living room where Sarah was sitting on the couch, watching TV. She looked up at me with that fake, apologetic smile that she always wore when she wanted to control the narrative. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. "I'm done, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't working anymore. I can't do this with you." For a moment, she just stared at me, her smile faltering as she processed what I had just said. Then, she stood up, her face twisted with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "What? You're really just going to throw everything away over some stupid texts? Over nothing?" "Don't downplay it," I snapped. "It's not just some texts. It's the lies, the deceit, the fact that you've been disrespecting me for months. I don't deserve this. And frankly, I don't even want to be around you anymore." I could see the panic in her eyes, but she didn't want to admit it. She kept trying to spin things, claiming that I was overreacting, that she was sorry, that we could work through it. But it was too late. I was done being gaslit. I was done being made to feel like I was the problem when I was the one who had been wronged. "I don't think we can fix this," I said, my heart heavy but resolute. "I'm not going to keep trying to save something that was already broken. I want a divorce." The words came out of my mouth like a weight had been lifted from my chest, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't easy. It wasn't some grand, dramatic moment. But it was the right decision. Sarah didn't have much to say after that. She started crying, but it didn't make a difference. It felt hollow, like her tears weren't for me, but for herself. She was losing control of the situation, and that's all she cared about. She begged me to stay, said we could work things out, but I knew better. This wasn't about fixing things. It was about her wanting to keep her comfort, her status quo. She wasn't ready to admit her fault. She wasn't ready to change. And me? I wasn't ready to stay. I told her to take some time to gather her things, and I walked out. It wasn't the most dramatic breakup, no shouting, no throwing things, no big public scene. But it felt final. And that finality was exactly what I needed to start moving forward. I had to close that door. I had to let go of the woman who had once meant everything to me. The hardest part wasn't signing the divorce papers or leaving the house, it was the emotional weight that came with the aftermath. It wasn't just about losing her, it was about losing the life I had envisioned with her. The life that had been a lie all along. After the breakup, the weeks that followed felt like a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and awkward interactions with mutual friends. But I was strangely at peace, at least for the most part. There were moments when the anger would resurface, especially when I saw her trying to portray herself as the victim to our friends. She painted this picture of me as the bad guy, the one who couldn't handle a little bit of miscommunication, while she acted like the injured party. She tried to play the part of the misunderstood wife, the woman who had been hurt by my coldness. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't angry anymore. I was just over it. And yet, there were still moments when I'd find myself missing the life I thought I had. I missed the mornings we used to have together, the little inside jokes, the plans we made for the future. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of what she had done. I reminded myself of how she lied and how she thought she could just sweep it all under the rug. Those memories, no matter how good they seemed in the moment, were overshadowed by the betrayal. I had to let go of them, just like I had to let go of her. Over time, I started to find myself again. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with family, and even took up a hobby I had forgotten about, hiking. It felt strange at first, to take time for myself without the constant pressure of a relationship weighing me down. But the more I spent focusing on me, the more I realized just how much of myself I had lost in that marriage. I had put so much of my identity into being her husband that I forgot who I was outside of that role. It wasn't easy, and it took a long time for me to fully accept the reality of what had happened. There were days when I still felt like a fool, like I had been taken advantage of. I had questions I couldn't answer. Why had she done it? Why didn't she just leave if she was unhappy? Why couldn't she just be honest with me? But in the end, I realized that those questions didn't matter anymore. The answers didn't change anything. The only thing I could control was how I moved forward. Looking back now, I'm grateful for the lessons learned, even though I wouldn't wish this kind of experience on anyone. First and foremost, I learned to trust my gut. If something feels off in a relationship, don't ignore it. Don't brush it aside. It's easy to get lost in the comfort of routine, but that comfort can be the biggest illusion. I also learned to never put someone else's happiness above my own. I had spent so many years trying to make Sarah happy, trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. The most important lesson, though, was to let go of things that no longer served me. I had to let go of the marriage, but more than that, I had to let go of the person I had become while I was in it. I couldn't hold on to someone who didn't value me, someone who thought that dishonesty was an acceptable way to treat a partner. The relationship was never going to be what I wanted it to be, and sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and choose yourself. If I could offer advice to anyone in a similar situation, it would be this: don't be afraid to let go. Trust yourself enough to make the hard decisions, even when they feel impossible. You deserve honesty. You deserve respect. And you deserve to be with someone who values you as much as you value them. Life moves forward, and so should you. It may take time, but eventually, you'll see that the peace you find on the other side is worth it. The next few weeks felt like a strange, surreal dream. Sarah packed her things in a hurry, but I didn't stop her. There was no point in trying to hold on to something that had already crumbled. The house, once filled with shared memories and laughter, now felt suffocating. I spent days just walking around, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had unraveled. One moment, I was planning a future with the woman I loved, and the next, I was cleaning out the spare room and wondering where it all went wrong. I'd never imagined I'd be here, sitting in my own home, alone, picking up the pieces of a marriage that no longer existed. Sarah moved out the following week. We didn't talk much after that. I didn't want closure from her, I didn't need it. The truth was already out in the open, and no amount of apologies could change what had happened. I was done. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when I missed her, when I longed for the life we had shared. But those moments were fleeting, and they were always followed by the cold realization of what she had done to me. I realized that my sadness was rooted in the loss of the life I thought I had, not the woman I had married. And that was the hardest part, realizing how much of myself I had given away to this relationship, how much I had sacrificed, thinking I was doing the right thing. But now, I had to find a way to take it all back, to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, I started to take a hard look at myself. I realized I had been neglecting my own needs, my own happiness, for so long. I had let myself get lost in the idea of being the perfect husband, the perfect partner. I thought that by doing everything for Sarah, by giving her everything she wanted, I was somehow fulfilling my role. But in the process, I had forgotten about me. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and playing guitar. I spent more time with friends who had been pushed aside during my marriage. Slowly, I was starting to find pieces of myself I had long forgotten. But it wasn't easy. There were moments when I found myself spiraling, questioning everything I had done in the past. What if I had seen the signs earlier? What if I had spoken up more, fought harder for the relationship? But those thoughts were fleeting. I reminded myself that I couldn't change the past. What I could do was focus on the future, and on healing. One of the hardest parts of all of this was facing my friends and family. They had all known Sarah, and I could already hear the questions before they were asked. What happened? How did you not see this? But as the weeks went by, I realized that my loved ones were more supportive than I ever expected. My best friend, Jake, was the first to reach out after Sarah left. He didn't ask me for the details, he just said, "I'm here if you need to talk." It was simple, but it meant the world to me. I didn't want to be the guy who was pitted, the guy who had failed in his marriage. But the support I received helped me understand that I wasn't alone in this. My family was there for me, too, offering a shoulder to lean on, even though I felt embarrassed by what had happened. Slowly, I began to see that I wasn't defined by my marriage. I was more than just Sarah's husband. I was me, and I had a lot of life left to live. Eventually, the inevitable came, the divorce papers. Sarah and I sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, both of us avoiding eye contact. The tension was thick, but there was no fighting, no arguing. It had all been said, all been done. The divorce wasn't messy, which was a small blessing. We both wanted it to be over, as civil as possible. It was strange, though, signing the papers felt like I was officially closing a chapter one had spent years building. I thought I'd feel relief, but there was a weird emptiness that settled in instead. This was really happening. Sarah was a part of my past now, and I was officially free. The hardest part was knowing she had already moved on. There was no sign of her slowing down, no remorse for the destruction she had caused. It didn't surprise me anymore, but it still stung. She had already put herself first, as always. Months passed, and I slowly started to feel like myself again. The void left by Sarah's departure was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. I started dating again, tentatively at first. But with each date, I learned more about what I wanted in a relationship and what I wasn't willing to tolerate. It was a process, but it felt good to be out there, meeting new people, and feeling like there was hope for my future. I knew I wasn't ready for anything serious, but just the act of getting out there again helped me realize how much I had been missing out on. Life wasn't over, even if it felt like it for a while. Eventually, I reached a point where I was able to let go of the bitterness. I stopped letting Sarah's betrayal control my thoughts. I stopped asking myself why she did it, or how I could have been different. I knew the answer: it wasn't about me. It was about her. Her choices, her mistakes. And as hard as it was, I had to accept that. It wasn't an overnight process. There were days when I wanted to pick up the phone and call her, to demand some kind of closure. But I knew better now. The closure I was looking for wasn't going to come from her. It had to come from me. I started to feel lighter, like I was finally free from the weight of her lies. I had learned that it was okay to put myself first, that it was okay to walk away when something wasn't right. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful again. Looking back, I realize I wouldn't change a thing. Yes, the pain of betrayal was excruciating. Yes, the process of untangling myself from that toxic relationship was difficult. But I learned so much about myself. I learned what I'm willing to accept, what I deserve, and how to trust my instincts. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm excited to find out. I'm in a place now where I'm open to love, but I'm also more focused on building a life for myself, one where I'm the priority. I don't need anyone to complete me. I'm complete on my own. And that's the most liberating thing I've ever realized.